Hello everyone and welcome to a new MechLord video. Today's theme is Duel Links dying? A couple of months ago, Team 6K did a video titled You're Wrong About Duel Links, where they discussed a previous Loom video assessing that the addition of Go Rush World meant the end for Duel Links somehow, meant that the game was gonna close down in a couple of months or so. And I really enjoyed this video, I thought it was really insightful. But then I dug deeper in the rabbit hole and I noticed that a lot of people already made Duel Links is dying type of videos, and a lot of people are still asking to this day if Duel Links is dying. For some reason, a large majority of these discussions have been started in January 2022. I wonder why. But to be fair, people have been saying that Duel Links is dying ever since 2018 at the very least, for the most absurd reasons out there. So you mean to tell me that people hate the pay-to-win meta and the free-to-play Sylvans? How does that work? Anyway, after all this time, it is finally my turn to investigate the truth behind the question. Is Duel Links actually dying? Or is everyone just throwing a tantrum for nothing? Or maybe a third secret option that no one has thought of yet? Disclaimer! This video is going to contain a lot of words and a lot of data. All of this data that I'm about to show comes from free resources online that I've been able to find super easily. I'm even going to make sure to source my, sources every time that some graph or stats or numbers show up on screen. You might be wondering, why are you doing this, MechLord? Well, there's two reasons. The first is, a lot of these sites also have more in-depth data, but you have to pay money to access them, and I don't have that kind of money at the moment. And second, I wanted to make the point that anyone could have found and used this data if they had bothered to look. A lot of Duel Links is dying type of videos only use one specific set of data and don't even bother to look for other data that might contradict what they're saying, which is kind of dumb because there is some data available that you can access for free, and it is an objective mistake to not do so and kind of misleading if we're to be honest. I'm not trying to point fingers at anyone, but if you're going to try and find an objective truth to the question is Duel Links is dying, it is a mistake to not consider all the data available to you. Before we can get into the question of is Duel Links dying proper, I feel like we have to define what dying is for a game as a service like Duel Links. Then once we do that, we can discuss whether dying is actually happening to Duel Links. And last but not least, if Duel Links is dying, how can we, and by we I mean Konami pretty much, stop this from happening? So first and foremost, how do we define dying for a game as a service? Well, to keep it short, there's basically 4 pointers that indicate that a game is currently dying or is already dead. First of which is lack of content updates from the developer. If a developer judges that their game is dead, they are no longer going to put the effort into updating it. The most you're gonna get are some bug fixes every now and then, but game updates will no longer contain new events, new stuff to unlock, new progression, etc. The second point is a decreasing player base. If a game is dying, less people are playing it. And if less people are playing a game, new players might not be motivated to stay as much as they would if the player base was thriving and growing. So it's both a old players are leaving scenario and a new players aren't coming as fast to replace the old players kind of situation. Third, a consequent drop in revenue could be a clear sign that both players do not care about the game anymore and that the developers would have good reasons to also give up on the game that is not making them as much money as it is costing them. Evaluating the cost of a game as a service is always a tough affair because unlike with traditional games you have server costs, you have the cost of creating new events, so it's not like the game is released and then you can move on to a new project. It's like the game is released and then you have to keep working on it to justify keeping it on the market for several years. If the game isn't making as much money, there's no reason to try and keep it on the market further. Ergo, a developer would be motivated to just drop the game entirely. And last but not least, community fragmentation. Kinda goes hand in hand with a decreasing player base, but is also somewhat different as this refers more to the overall community sentiment regarding the game and whether or not they show an interest even outside of playing the game. If all 4 of these criteria are met, a game's developer is basically going to consider the game they're working on as on its way out and accelerate things further by announcing stuff as end of service. Now onto the actual meat of this video. is dying actually happening to Duel Links? If we take a look at the 4 criteria that we have defined earlier, one by one, we can easily find out that lack of content updates is not something that's happening to Duel Links. We still get regular updates to the game, new content being added both in the form of new cards being available, new characters being created and released for players to enjoy, existing and new events being proposed to players, and even massive updates like the addition of a new world. I'm pretty sure we got a massive UI update back in just last year actually, if I'm not mistaken. So as far as this point is concerned, I wouldn't say that Duel Links is dying. Konami is still putting a lot of effort to update Duel Links and keep updating it, and surely they would not do so if Duel Links was on its way out, which is a good sign at the very least. On to point B, the decreasing player base. Something that a lot of people mention when talking about Duel Links dying is, oh look, at the Steam numbers, Duel Links doesn't have nearly as much Steam players that it's used to. And this is objectively true. Ever since the release of Master Duel in January 2022, you can see that the Duel Links player base has suffered a massive hit. However, on this graph you can notice a couple of spikes every now and then. These correspond to the release of new worlds which are still bringing new or old players back in. It's certainly not quite up to the level of new releases before. In fact, the peak of Duel Links happened during the release of Arc 5 World, which is conveniently hidden by the January 2022 thing. I should have taken a new screenshot for that. And Raids and Sevens and Go Rush Worlds didn't bring nearly as many players in than the previous updates, but they still do bring people back in, even for a short amount of time. On another semi-positive note, you'll notice that outside of these spikes, the player base of Duel Links remains relatively stable. It's not like the game is still hemorrhaging players, but the active player base is overall pretty much the same today as it was ever since February 2022, which is also a good sign. For comparison's sake, this means that Duel Links is pretty much on the same level as Supervive, a recently released PC game that people keep telling me to play, which I will not because unfortunately my soul already belongs to League of Legends. This terribly sad admission aside, I did a little bit of digging on Supervive and turns out it's actually a dying game. Supervive is dying, everyone, or it's already dead, apparently. It also puts Duel Links on the same level as Paladins in terms of active player base on Steam, which unfortunately for Paladins, a game that I've also never tried out because I was playing Overwatch at the time, it's dead. Paladins is dead and Paladins no longer exists apparently. However, unlike these two PC-only games, Duel Links is first and foremost a mobile game, which is something that a lot of people conveniently forget to mention when discussing the Duel Links player base. This means that looking at Steam charts isn't enough to actually determine the actual size of the Duel Links player base at large, which in turn means I have to look up for mobile data, which is something that is incredibly annoying to do, but that I did anyway. For instance, here is the number of downloads that Duel Links has gotten ever since its release on both iOS and Android platforms. And to be completely honest, this graph doesn't actually say anything. Like, it makes most sense that the game got its most downloads when it released, and you can't actually see pretty much what's happened ever since then, so let's take a closer look. These are the downloads for Duel Links from January 1st, 2018 to January 1st, 2025, so in the span of 7 years, this is pretty much what new downloads have looked like, and you can already see that ever since January 2022, the game has been downloaded less times than in the years prior. I should really take this opportunity to mention that downloads do not necessarily refer to new players. It can also be old players coming back to the game, or simply installing the game on a new device. I might be wrong on that because I think you're still using the same Google ID or Apple Store ID, but I reckon these make a very small minority of the downloads that Duel Links is getting per day. In case you're wondering about the download spikes, these usually happen around 3 specific time periods. January for the anniversary updates, which is when there is a lot of new and free content being distributed to players. September, which is new world releases, so pretty much the same. And the KC Cups, generally the one happening in May, tend to be the most popular ones for some reason, but all of them also contain an influx of new free stuff for players to get, including a lot of gems. If we're looking at the stats ever since the launch of Master Duel, you can see this decline further. There is a huge download spike on March 4th, 2022 for some reason, and it's almost exclusively from Saudi Arabia and Brazil. I don't know if anything happened there, but this is most definitely an exception and not a rule or anything. So this is the part where Duel Links is declining. Big deal, we already knew that. Now let's take a look at the downloads that Duel Links has received over the past year. There are still 1,000 to 1,700 people installing Duel Links every day. In fact, in December 2024, 29,000 people installed Duel Links compared to 37,000 in November, 33,000 in October, and 36,000 in September, which is still pretty good for a game entering its 8th year of service. Now granted, this is not nearly as much as Duel Links used to get, which is going to be a recurring theme in this video, but it's not like no new players are coming to Duel Links either. If we look at the total number of downloads per year for Duel Links, we can see that there's been a major decrease ever since the launch of Master Duel, even though the number of downloads was already slowed down ever since, well, 2018, because it makes sense, there's only so many people on planet Earth that can install the game. And yet I don't think anyone was making the Duel Links is dying because less people are installing it on mobile devices back in 2021, you know? Despite everything, 2024 was the lowest downloads year for Duel Links yet, but 389,000 downloads is still pretty respectable, all things considered, for a game entering its 8th year of service. Unfortunately, as far as the player base data is concerned, this is pretty much all that I have. I do not have access to the concurrent players data, for instance, so I have no idea how many players actually play Duel Links after installing it. I also wish I had data such as retention numbers, how many people are still playing Duel Links the day after they installed it. What about 7 days later? What about a month later? But if I had to recap what I know from the data that I've seen so far, I would say that Duel Links is still bringing in a respectable number of players on mobile, but less so than in previous years. Like I've mentioned before, download spikes tend to happen when there's a lot of new content. We've also seen that the active player base on Steam is dwindling after a massive hemorrhage in early 2022, but the active player base on Steam was never really revealing of the actual number of players that enjoy Duel Links. Unfortunately, due to the lack of data on the actual player base on mobile for Duel Links, I can only make the following assumption without being able to verify it for sure, that the mobile player base is actually much larger than Steam's player base, which in turn would be enough to make the whole Duel Links is dying because Steam numbers argument completely moot. Number C is not a number. Number C, a drop in revenue. As far as PC data goes, according to Gamerlytic, Duel Links brought in $65 million throughout its entire lifetime. And this website also lets me know that Duel Links was downloaded 4.3 million times ever since its launch on Steam, which, if these numbers are true, does confirm my hypothesis that the Duel Links Steam player base is absolutely dwarfed by the mobile one, where it is estimated that 16 million players installed Duel Links throughout its lifetime and generated $271 million for Konami. I mean, it's not just Konami, because Google Play Store and Apple both take a cut, but still. This aside, let's go back to the discussion of the drop of revenue. As far as the American iOS user base is concerned, Duel Links is still performing pretty nicely, having generated $2 million last year and having been downloaded 175,000 times, which is not a reflection of the complete data for Duel Links, of course, because, you know, we're basically ignoring the rest of the world and Android users, but it does compare somewhat decently against Hearthstone, which is also a game that has been around for a very long time, and compares much less favorably against Marvel Snap, a game that has released somewhat recently, and which is generating basically 4 times the revenue and at least 3 times the number of downloads. If we take a look at the global revenue generated by Duel Links ever since launch, we can all once again see that there is a decline happening ever since Master Duel released, which I'm just gonna keep saying because it's true. However, even before that decline, we can see that there are clear periods where the game is making huge amounts of money and periods where it is not making nearly as much. Surprise, surprise, the 2 biggest spenders happen to be the United States and Japan. In fact, out of the aforementioned 271 millions that Duel Links has made over its lifetime, 151 million comes from Japan and 78 millions come from the United States. Everyone else is just catching up. What are we doing, my French brothers? Are we really gonna let a third world country like the United States outspend us? How preposterous! If we take a closer look at more recent years, you can once again see the start of this downward slope, which, again, Master Duel releasing, everyone. It's very funny that there was also a peak in revenue, like just a couple of days before that because of the anniversary updates. And it's also worth mentioning that after the Master Duel release, well, the game never generated as much money as it used to before. But these are not bad numbers anyway. Like, if we look at the amount of money people have spent on Duel Links ever since January 2023, there are still periods where Duel Links makes over $300,000 weekly. For instance, this peak in revenue happening in October 2023, that coincides with the release of Deep Emotion on October 25th. Correlation doesn't mean causation. I have no way of knowing for sure that the release of Deep Emotion is what caused this spike in revenue. I'm just very likely to believe that this is probably what definitely happened. This other spike in revenue that happened in mid-2023 also corresponds with the release of a new product, which is Wings of Cleariness on May 24. Looking at the daily data for 2024, you also see these spikes of revenues happening, including, for instance, this one, which corresponds with the release of Strikers expansions on March 28th, a day on which players spent $87,000, Ergo making it the most profitable day of 2024. The second spike, then the second most profitable day of 2024, corresponds with the release of Selection Box Volume 7, I think it's the one that had Forbidden Droplet in it. $82,000 was spent on that very day. And last but not least, this spike in revenue corresponds with the release of the main box Starving Venom, the one that had the Predoplan stuff. And I've given enough numbers for now. I forgot to put the numbers for this release on my notes, so it made a lot of money also. Something that's definitely worth mentioning when looking at this graph is the releases that tend to make the most money are main box speed releases. If we look at the total revenue per year that Duel Links has generated, we can see that 2019 was the most profitable year for the game, where it generated $55 million US, a number that has been decreasing since, reaching its lowest point in 2024, where it only generated $6 million US, which is still $6 million US. I mean, which once again isn't nearly as much as what the game used to make before Master Duel released, but is still a pretty good number. So in short, we know for sure that Duel Links was generating around $100,000 US per week in 2024, which is insane to think about. Again, it's not nearly as much as it used to make, but it's still pretty good for a game with this longevity that is not called League of Legends. Like we've discussed, revenue spikes tend to occur around main box releases, selection box releases, and anniversary boxes. I don't want to go too in-depth into the proper numbers, unless you want me to do so, which is going to be an entirely different video altogether. And like we've mentioned before, there's no significant revenue spikes for Rush Duel releases, which does tend to confirm Loom's argument that Rush Duel isn't actually saving Duel Links. I'm not saying that it is condemning Duel Links either, though these are two different things. After taking a huge hit in 2022 because of Master Duel, the loss of revenue stabilized to the point where Duel Links is still making overall the same amount of money every year since then. And last but not least, another interesting tidbit of data that I wanted to share with you. Despite making for a smaller portion of the downloads, and presumably having a smaller player base, which makes sense because there are less people in Japan than in the United States. I don't know for sure that this is true though. All that to say that Japanese players outspend every other demographic on the game currently. So if Duel Links is still afloat to this day, it's mostly thanks to Japanese players. To go a little bit more in depth, because I do think this is a very funny number, in 2024 the average player spent $15 on Duel Links. Which is not to say that every player spent $15 on the game. I reckon that the vast majority of players did not spend anything on Duel Links, and that there are a couple of outliers that spent maybe $200, $300, pushing the average up on their own. Still, $15 per players on Duel Links, that's a pretty good number. The average Japanese player spent $42 on Duel Links in 2024. That's almost thrice as much. Now onto point D, community fragmentation. If we take a look at the amount of viewers Duel Links streams are getting on Twitch, we can see that, oh look, there's less people being interested in them ever since January 2022. And the spike that you're seeing in September 2022 corresponds to the Vrain's World launch, which I reckon is when a lot of people got interested in Duel Links again because of link summoning and everything. And as you can witness, there's no similar spikes for the 7s and Go Rush World releases. As for the amount of channels actually broadcasting Duel Links content, this number also took a huge hit in January 2022, but mostly stabilized. There's a slight decrease throughout 2024 for some unknown reasons. The game was really bad in 2024. But the channels that do tend to play and stream Duel Links still actively do so. Still, looking at Duel Links stats and comparing the years 2019, 2023, and 2024, while the gap between 2023 and 2024 isn't actually all that important, and though there are still decreases compared to previous years, it's hard not to notice and point to the massive loss in viewership and interest that had occurred between 2019 and 2023. A lot of it has to do with Decade very specifically. Now, if you don't know Decade, how could you? He was a prolific Duel Links content creator for years. To this day, some of his old Duel Links videos still outperform some of his recent videos. He was also responsible for a lot of the tournament infrastructure that has occurred around the game, including the Meta Weekly tournaments that happen every Monday. And he's also the brains behind the project that is Duel Links Meta, which is still, to this day, the #1 resource for all Duel Links related content. And a huge reason why Duel Links specifically took a hit in 2022 was because Decade moved from Duel Links to Master Duel, and in doing so, not only retained but also increased its viewership, which if anything stands to prove that a lot more people were interested in Master Duel ever than in Duel Links even at its peak. To this day, I would think Grand Aria is probably one of the biggest, if not the biggest, Duel Links streamer that we currently have. He is the one holding a fair number of Duel Links tournaments that he is broadcasting on his channel, which is what Decade used to do. But unfortunately, he is not getting the numbers that Decade used to get. In fact, if we are looking at the tournament data for the Meta Weekly tournaments that happen every Monday, and I'm using the present tense because these are still happening, we can clearly see that back in 2020, 2021, around 100 players would enter that tournament. Now it's only around 40 players entering the tournament. The silver lining to this is that the Duel Links Grand Prix events, which have for the most part replaced the Meta Weeklies, are getting pretty much the same number of entrants as the Meta Weekly tournaments used to get. And this is, in my opinion, a real success for Grand Aria that has been organizing these tournaments from the ground up. Where else could we take a look at to get a proper idea of the Duel Links community but the Duel Links subreddit, the place that unfortunately for me made me famous. Something that I find very interesting is that even with the release of Master Duel, the number of people that have subscribed to the Duel Links subreddit kept increasing. There's no like hemorrhage of people that have just fled the Duel Links subreddit to go to Master Duel instead, and we can still see that less people have subscribed to the Duel Links subreddit over the past couple of years compared to the previous years when Duel Links hit its stride. In other words, the line is going up, but it's not going as much up as it used to. If we're looking at the subreddit's activity, we can see that a lot less people are being active on the subreddit overall. This graph tends to indicate a huge loss in activity in late 2023/early 2024, which maybe could be true. Maybe a lot of people just gave up on Duel Links because of Tachyon meta, but it also could be linked to the style that I'm using, very specifically having to deal with Reddit's new anti-API policy. Still, I find it funny that despite everything, the Duel Links subreddit pretty much does the same size as the Master Duel subreddit and is 10 times better in my opinion. And last but not least, if we were to look at the overall satisfaction that the community at large has with Duel Links, we can see that the number of reviews for the game decreased substantially ever since the launch of Master Duel, but that the reviews are still mostly positive. This trend is changing in recent weeks because of the current hero domination on the ladder, but it would seem to indicate that the player base at large is still mostly satisfied with Duel Links. This also applies to the Google Play and App Store ratings for Duel Links, which are still mostly overall positive, with a minority of players being overwhelmingly negative about the game. This doesn't mean that their criticisms aren't valid or anything, although a lot of negative reviews boil down to, I used to play Yu-Gi-Oh! During recess when I was a child, and now I summoned the Dark Magician and I got beat by someone using some weird cards and doing 6 summons per turn. What is going on? classic Yu-Gi Boomer stuff. But there are valid criticisms for Konami to consider in order to improve upon some of the issues that this game currently has. So, in short, once again, Master Duel was the worst thing that has happened to Duel Links, even worse than 6 Samurai Tier 0 format. But in 2022, Master Duel happened, and we know how we'll have to deal with the consequences. Despite this, I would reckon that Duel Links still has a pretty strong community. People are still showing up to tournaments and showing an interest for tournaments. People are still, creating video content on Duel Links, such as yours truly. And all the people that have said that Duel Links was going to die in 2022 are still making videos about Duel Links to this day. And while the community isn't nearly as big as it used to be, it is still there. And last but not least, for the most part, the people playing the game seem to be rather content with it, which in turn doesn't mean that the game is perfect at the moment or that criticism of it isn't valid. So if we go back to the question of is dying actually happening to Duel Links, is Duel Links actually dying? First of all, no, we're still getting a lot of new content and updates from Konami, and second of all, it's not really dying as much as it is declining and has done so ever since 2022, and now we're out of the declining parts and back into the stabilized but fraction of what it used to be part of Duel Links, if that makes sense. But what could possibly be the cause of Duel Links' decline? It's Master Duel. I've said it like 1,000 times. Were you not paying attention? It's Master Duel. Master Duel released and ruined everything for everyone. Because at the end of the day, when you compare the two, Master Duel has more cards than Duel Links ever had, including very popular archetypes like the Dragon Maids and the Tri-Brigades that Duel Links didn't have back when Master Duel launched. Master Duel managed to trick people into thinking that it was free-to-play friendly, and though its monetization approach is less predatory than Duel Links, I don't think that's true, but a lot of people seems to be convinced that you can just make decks super easily on Master Duel even to this day. I'm probably gonna make a video talking about that in the future, but for now let's just say that people think Master Duel is free-to-play friendly and Duel Links isn't. And they're right on one of these two things. And last but not least, Master Duel provides a better bridge to the actual paper TCG and TCG experience that a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh players and content creators were looking for, and which they could only find in unofficial simulators before, like Edo Pro and Duel Link Book. What does Duel Links have? The tall guy kawaii face. That's it. But how can Konami stop Duel Links from declining further? First and foremost, does Konami even care about Duel Links at this point? I mean, once again, Master Duel exists and is the more profitable product. I'm not gonna go into detail into how much money Master Duel has been making for Konami ever since it launched, but it has been making a lot of money and is the definite game for you to enjoy the Yu-Gi-Oh experience, which Duel Links used to be, but it's not anymore. So it makes sense for Konami to pool their resources, including marketing ones, into Master Duel over Duel Links, because people have clearly shown more interest for Master Duel than Duel Links. But let's assume that Konami does care about Duel Links and wants to bring it back to the forefront of the competitive TCG genre. One way that Konami could get new players into the game would be through a massive user acquisition campaign. You run ad campaigns, you make sponsored streams and videos, and you do some cross promotion. Let's start with the ad campaigns. Surely you've seen some of these over the years. Some ads that you see on social networks that a kind fellow has collected on Reddit for me to use. And some of these are recent too, like the 7th Word release that was in 2023. Konami is still making this to this day. And Konami is mostly running ad campaigns on TikTok, which is going to be really complicated. And on Meta, where they basically met with a resounding for players. My assumption, although I have no way of verifying this, Konami currently promotes Master Duel more so than they promote Duel Links, and that putting more effort into Duel Links' promotion over Master Duel would result in more people coming to Duel Links. That's just simple math. Onto the sponsored streams / videos part. Once again, there's two ways Konami could go about it. They could contact Yu-Gi-Oh content creators and be like, hey, make some videos on Duel Links talking about, I don't know, the new updates or the new KC card or something. I've included, content creators that have operated outside of Duel Links for several years, like Farfo and MBT. But if anyone deserves some recognition from Konami, it is Decade, absolutely. I'm not the biggest Decade fan out there, but he has single-handedly propped up the Duel Links community for years, and I've never received as much as a thanks for doing so from Konami. Another thing Konami could do would also be to contact card game content creators in general for some sponsored stuff, which is something that they used to do very profusely. We all remember the Seito Kaiba challenge that happened in the middle of D-Sod, where players had a chance to challenge people that had never played Duel Links before to get a chance to face the virtual one and only Seto Kaiba, voiced by the actual Seto Kaiba voice, which was really cool. And once again, this is something that Konami is still somewhat doing to this day, sort of, but I don't think it's a correct thing to be doing. Because the people that Konami is contacting to talk about, rush duels and stuff, really don't care about Yu-Gi-Oh! Rush dueling to begin with. Which makes sense because compared to baby card games like Hearthstone, Duel Links is so much more complicated because Yu-Gi-Oh! Is so much more complicated. So the best thing you could do and what Konami should be doing is addressing Yu-Gi-Oh! Content creators more, because these are the people that are going to bring the people in that are going to know how to play Duel Links. And last but certainly, there's cross-promotion, which is something that Konami has tried with cross-duel. Haha, that's very funny that this happened. Where if you're a Duel Links player, you can enter a code in Cross Duel to get some free stuff. Or was it the other way around? I don't remember. Rest in peace, Cross Duels. They only did this because they were about to, shut down Cross Duels because it was not performing as much as it should have been. But I think it would be interesting to try and bring Master Duel players into Duel Links and vice versa. Well, the vice versa part has already happened. But it could be interesting to run a promotion in Master Duel like, hey, if you play Duel Links for 7 days, you get 7 packs of the new thing that you want or something. And hey, once people play a format where Maxi isn't legal, maybe they're gonna stay. And last but not least, I need to talk about this because this is something that people bring forth a lot. They could just improve Duel Links. They could just make Duel Links into a better game. Like, for instance, giving Duel Links a crafting system. That would definitely save Duel Links from the... Do you all really think that? We've just discussed about how much money Duel Links is still making to this day. Do you all really think a crafting system is what is going to make Konami enough money to justify having spent time to work and balance this feature? Like, a crafting system for Duel Links goes against the very monetization model of Duel Links. If you do that, people aren't gonna buy packs, people aren't gonna buy structure deck. They could just craft the cards that they want and call it a day. So Konami would just shoot themselves in the foot if they did that. In your opinion, if you think about this for a couple of seconds, which is more likely to happen after a crafting system similar to Master Duels is added to Duel Links? Option A. People just magically flock back from Master Duel to Duel Links. They forget about the extended card pool and the fact that it looks better on PC and the fact that you don't have to play with really obscene skills and you don't have hand traps and the favorite deck is probably not playable there. And they just all come back anyway to Duel Links because they heard that it has a crafting system now, and that makes it so much better than Master Duel suddenly. Or option B, which is Konami lose a shitload of money and kills Duel Links instantly because, surprise surprise, giving too much stuff for free means that people aren't spending money in your game anymore, which means that your game is dying. There is no way that we could ever get crafting into Duel Links because Duel Links from the ground up wasn't built with crafting in mind. The only way we could get Master Duel-like crafting in Duel Links is if Konami kills Duel Links to announce Duel Links 2, which is basically the same game, but this time it has crafting. What I'm trying to say is, it makes absolute zero sense to do something that hurts your business. And sure, just like most of you, I would love to get rid of my 3 copies of Alecto Sovereign of Birds that I'm never going to use into anything, because this card is not even worth the digital ink it is printed on. But the Duel Links economy is a very meticulously planned structure that you can't just derail or try to change completely from the ground up without breaking it all together, which is what a crafting system that was not adapted for Duel Links monetization would do. The solution that Konami has found is basically box chips, which allows you to get all the cards for basically free, and this is as far as it is going to go. We're never going to get crafting into Duel Links because crafting inherently doesn't work with Duel Links monetization. And if we're done huffing copium for a couple of minutes here, we have to remember that for everything that I've just said that Konami could do to save Duel Links, this is Konami that we're talking about. A company that has been drowning in controversy ever since the mid-2010s, has several issues with the Yu-Gi-Oh! Player base at large, even outside of Duel Links or Master Duel, and let's not even get into the drama that Konami has inadvertently started due to their lack of care. So in turn, here I am presenting a list of everything Konami will do to breathe new life into Duel Links. Haha, gotcha! All jokes aside, what Konami is going to do for Duel Links in the following years is what Konami has always done for Duel Links in the previous years, which is release new archetypes, preferably very popular ones from the TCG or Master Duel that people people really seem to enjoy. And also try to make your favorite deck playable through the addition of skills that are more often than not really properly balanced, but make the game more unique compared to the TCG/Master Duel version of it. Can you envision a future in which Gemini is playable? Now you can, because of Duel Links. Overall conclusion for this entire mess of a video that is way too long. Duel Links took a huge hit when Master Duel dropped, and has been on a slow but steady decline since. Duel Links is no longer hemorrhaging players, but it is not bringing as many players in as it was losing them back in the day, and the same goes for revenue. Despite this, Duel Links is still generating a lot of money for Konami, so end of service seems unlikely in the short term. Contrary to what Loom says, Duel Links is not going bye-bye in a couple of months. I didn't really mention it up to this point, but it's also worth noting that Duel Links is coasting on low effort mode. Like, there's new characters and new cards being added to the game, sure, but most of the events that we're getting are basically using recycled assets or the entire structure from previous events, which means that they don't cost nearly as much for Konami to make as, like, the very first giant boss monster fight event that had to be developed from the ground up, or the very first tag duel event. It costs less money to reuse something than to create a new thing altogether. Another way you can tell that Duel Links is in low effort mode, as I call it, is with QA errors slipping through the cracks more and more often. You know, some game-breaking bugs that happen every now and then, even minor bugs that tend to show up and not get noticed, and Konami fixes them later on. Which is not to say that Konami doesn't care at all about Duel Links, just that they care the bare minimum, you know? Konami could bring new life into Duel Links if they wanted to, but they don't want to, and also they can't do it. They just can't, because doing so would take focus away from Master Duel, which is like the opposite of the sensible thing to do. All in all, the golden years of Duel Links are behind us, but the game will keep chugging along for a long time, and by a long time, I mean a couple more years at the very least. It's worth appreciating that Duel Links was, for the longest time, the single biggest mobile card game of all time, even performing so much better than brand names like Hearthstone and Magic Arena. But this is all in the past now. And like I said, Duel Links isn't dying anytime soon. Stop listening to the people that say that it is. They clearly do not know what they're talking about. Instead, think of it this way. Duel Links has taken a gunshot to the hip back in 2022, a shot that was fired by Master Duel very specifically, and is no longer able to walk without aid, but it can still walk and it's still alive. In short, Duel Links is like an old person that is old now, and they used to be a world-renowned athlete, but now they can't even dribble a basketball anymore. I don't do sports. And this is fine, and this doesn't mean that they weren't a super great athlete all those years back, but they're not anymore. Someone else has taken their place. And what matters most is that they're still alive and still going along for the time being. Thank you for watching this really long video. It's insane how much work you have to do when you actually put in the time to do the research and want to find data to analyze and discuss. If you appreciated this video, may I invite you to like, comment, and subscribe for future videos. They're not gonna be nearly as documented or researched as this one, because this was, wow. This took a long time to make, but I feel like it was worth it, so let me know what you thought of it in the comments. If you'd like to support me further, you can check out my Ko-fi in the video description, where you can make a one-time donation or a monthly pledge in order to help me purchase all of these sites that withhold their data unless you buy a ridiculously expensive subscription to check out how much players Duel Links has. I would like to take this opportunity to thank my Ko-fi donators Dingus, Boy Zero, Jimmy, Zinnia, Yannick, Seal, Mark Lou, Fortuner16, the Abisaka Guru, Hulk Price, and Exorcist. Thank you all for the support, I really appreciate it. And if you have any video requests, make sure to let me know when you make a donation. But that said, that's the end of Duel Links. Duel Links is dead, and it's dying, and it has been dead for several years, and it is super dead, and it is completely dead, and if you skip to the end of the video to find out, Duel Links is dead. Oh no, we killed Duel Links. Well, Master Duel killed Duel Links, and it is super dead and nobody is ever playing it ever again, which is why I'm not turning into a Shadowverse channel. Thank you for watching the video, take care everyone, and see you all next time.